Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Welcome to the Climate and Resilience Tech Briefing from Deal Room. This is our monthly briefing that we do on a different topic. So if you might have seen some of the previous ones on deep tech, on AI, on defense, energy, and yeah, this one we wanted to focus on climate and resilience. Yeah, we're going to have lots of great data to show you. We're also going to show you where you can explore the data on the Deal Room platform as well, and we'll also be able to take some questions as we're going along. We'll keep an eye on the chat, but also at the end as well. So do let us know, drop in the chat where you're dialing in from today, and if you have any questions as we're going along. These are some of the people who are dialing in today. So lots of interest from people in corporates, in VC, in governments as well. So clearly a topic of great interest. So thanks again for joining. And now I will hand over to Lorenzo, who will start running through the data.
Hi, thanks for being here. I'm the head of research at Deal Room, and yeah, I'll walk through a few data, and analysis, and then we'll go through the live platform. Yeah, so just to get a pulse on, what's going on at the high level in the ecosystem. Overall, VC funding is up again quite significantly in 2025 after 2 years of flatline. A lot of this will be due to AI, but it's when we look back, a decade ago, is that 2 times a bit more growth. When we split this out, how much of this is AI, how much is not? Well, it's a lot due to AI, which is up 9 times in the last decade. OpenAI, other big rounds, making up like around 40, even more % of the total funding this year. So I guess AI is a bit taking out the breath to some of the other sectors. But there's still a lot of activity outside AI. Looking at climate tech specifically, well, it's still 3 times up in a decade, so a bit more than overall venture capital. But there's definitely been, like a big reshuffling of the market, coming down from a BPI of 2021, 2022, when it was like 3 times higher. And there's still, some substantial decline from last year. So definitely, the market is still very active, but there's pain to be felt. And when we...
Interesting point though, because I think many people would think that climate tech has really taken a battering in the last couple of years, but actually, if we look on that longer term view, it is outperforming the market in the last decade, up 3x rather than 2x.
Yeah, no, definitely. A lot of climate tech is also probably beneath by a mix of consideration, like interest rate, of course, have an impact on, like the cost of money have an impact on all startups. But if you need a lot of money, VC funding and not VC funding, like many climate tech startups do, then it is a bit higher. And there's also some consideration about either maturing segments of climate tech or segments that where global competition has maybe put a bit of a tarp on some sectors inside the climate tech. If I think about batteries, for instance, there was a lot of investment 2021, 2022 in the US and Europe. Some of those players, are actually building something and still growing, especially around a bit of new chemistries like silicon anode or something. But if we think about like normal lithium-ion batteries manufacturing and so on, a lot of that has been, well, crushed by just the sheer execution of China. So some of these sectors, of course, have completely, disappeared. A new one and reappeared, and so this is what we see behind these numbers. So it's a mix of different reasons. And yeah, when we look at how much climate tech was of the overall VC funding, well, in those two couple of years, 2021 till even 2023, it grew up to be up to 16%. Now we're around 7%. So it's like in percentage of the total funding. And yeah, what we were saying before, a lot of that the funding is instead going to AI and deep tech. There's some overlap between the two, like like foundational model makers are having both, but that's around 45% of the funding this year. And of course, something like also defense is now still quite, not huge, around 4%, but it's growing a lot. And climate has still been suffering and giving space to some of this sector. But as we will discuss a bit narratively, there's quite some portion of climate that are being more resilient, and these are also the ones that are more related to energy security, resilience, strategic independence, and those topics are still having a lot of activity.
Yeah, and it's been a theme of almost a rebranding of some climate tech in the last couple of years, of where a lot of the language around it is now more around resilience and energy security, as well as cost and other things, rather than necessarily green, sustainable, things like that.
Yeah, which is like, it's not to say like did some of the investment topics have actually changed, but more like, for just the cycles of maturity, market adoption, and everything. And I'd say, there's not been a crazy shift in the investment thesis around it. It's just that some of those have been rebranded while, before you were put in the focus in your wording as an investor, in your presentation, your pitch as a startup, when approaching sales and everything. Now there's a lot more, and sometimes it can be seen as a bad thing. Sometimes it can be seen as a good thing, in the sense that when your pitch can be about cost, it means that the technology has reached that maturity that you can just focus your pitch really, okay, this is cheaper, this is better, this will get adopted, and it has the other benefits of decarbonization. And so some of the solutions have matured to that stage, some are getting there.
And I think that rebranding piece can also be maybe associated with what we see actually on the next slide, and in terms of the distribution globally of where is being raised.
So actually, as if I were to ask to my mother here, that she would say, I expect, in the US, there's no support for, climate tech at the moment. And while that might be true in some senses, on the VC side, actually, the US has seen the highest share in the last 3 years of investment this year. They were like the highest share globally. And this is because a lot of that has been focused with these topics that are less, let's say, political and more actually aligned with the security, resilience, and domestic manufacturing side. So, like bit crazily, 4 of the 6 largest deals in the US this year were in nuclear energy. 2 around fusion and 2 around fission, and then 1 was mining, like AI discovery of mining for different critical metals, and another 1 was the new generation battery manufacturing focused on silicon anode. So everything is really around having domestic energy supply, abundant energy, about having critical minerals domestically, about being able to at least produce some batteries domestically. So those topics are still seeing a lot of attention, and is what has been driving the market.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because a couple of years ago, in Europe, we were patting ourselves on the back of how Europe was leading the world for climate tech investment, which it was briefly in 2023, but actually US has come back.
Yeah, but this is only the lens of VC funding. In like proper deployment, Europe is still ahead. Let's say it's deploying more of these technologies, still adopting more across almost all of them. It's still adoption more of electric vehicles, renewables, almost everything. But the VC funding side, it's a bit different to the next generation.
And to be fair, those shares are even still higher than overall VC. So Europe is over-indexing.
Yeah.
In absolute terms, the US does.
Yeah, in total terms, it's still more the US, especially with the latest AI hype boom. When we see these trends a bit reflected also in the VC fundraising in climate specialist funds. So there was still quite active environment till last year. We have started to see like a bit more pronounced slowdown in 2025. And what we mean with like the funds computed here is it's like what we call like really climate tech focused, especially VC, the typical investor around all the climate tech spectrum, at least most of it, like it's Santa, World Fund, Green Growth, these kind of people. And then there's some sector specialists, maybe around food, a lot of them, around transportation or around energy, around construction, real estate. And then there's some corporate with dedicated climate funds. And we don't include here like generalists or other things that do invest a lot in climate, but don't have a dedicated fund around that.
You can explore all of these on Deal Room as well. And you mentioned World Fund there. Actually, this presentation was initially compiled for their conference and their LP meeting. So shout out to them as well.
Yeah, and well, of course, I was mentioning a bit briefly that before that there's a lot beyond VC in climate tech. Well, you need to build, for the most part, you need to build a lot of then plans and hardware. And so there's debt, there's grant, and PE, project finance, and that has been growing a lot in the latest year. It was actually pretty massive the last 2 years when VC was a bit climbing down, and it's now making up like quite bigger share than VC funding, almost 2/3, 3/4 of the funding. So there's some of this is maturing, actual infrastructure development, and then you try to minimize the equity that you need to sell. So that VC funding doesn't give the full picture at the later stages, of course. And this can vary by sectors. There are some like if you need to build green molecule plants, you need to raise a lot of this. If you're like a bit more digital related sectors, sometimes around energy efficiency, of course, this stack varies. So it depends when you go more granular inside single segments of climate tech.
And quickly on green molecules, so they were talking about hydrogen, and what else would be covered under that?
Yeah, it's everything that is like a fuel. Some of them you can make in green ways. So it can be, of course, green hydrogen, but it can be sustainable aviation fuel that or like similar synthetic fuels. It can be also biofuels and things like this. It can be ammonia. Typically, a lot of that is used for transportation. Some of them can be used for some industrial processes. It can also be used, depending, where it makes sense in the future as a kind of storage and delivery of energy medium. But that's debatable. It needs all in certain cases. But there's a lot of application on this, and there was actually a white paper that we collaborated on with some data about this. So if someone interested, there's a lot more details in there.
Yeah, so while we're looking at VC before, there's a much broader financing market for some of these subsectors. And yeah, it's kind of, if you're building a big industrial plant, basically you're going to need some project finance along with your venture capital.
Yeah, and then of course, like speculate to the fact that there's a bit more maturing, there's a bit also sometimes a bit less financing, especially at the later stages. We have seen a lot of M&A happening, while it's a bit crazy to see 2021 how big of an outlier it was for public listing, like stock there in light green. But then after that, that has cooled down significantly. But while M&A has been really up in the last 3-4 years, so that there's a lot of this consolidation, which it's also a sign of some segments of climate tech maturing, while new ones are of course starting out. And yeah, and if we take just to put like a very wide view of but what has been created by climate tech in the last 20-30 years, it's around 3.8 trillion if we take the really big historical view. Inside there, there's a big player like Tesla, BID, Cato, and the rest. And if we look at the world pipeline, well, there's around 315 VC-backed companies in climate tech that have achieved either 100 million plus revenues or 1 billion plus valuation. So there's been a lot of value creation and a lot of these companies that are still growing and are still maturing, and quite a few decacorns and three, so like really big players. And then there's a strong pipeline, of course, that still needs to grow. And around 1.1 1K startups that join, let's say, this course and this journey to maturing every year.
And this kind of growth is pretty exceptional. 30x in 10 years, that's more than triple sort of if you were to look at everything else in tech. So it has sort of come from almost nowhere to being a multi-trillion-dollar industry. And as you said, still pretty early stage. There's a lot that of the companies are early in that pipeline, still ready to be kind of funded, scaled, move through and create a lot more value over the coming years as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then to go a bit, how climate tech has evolved. Well, one story is I'd say it's really energy compared to the rest, and especially transportation, a couple of other sectors. So when around 2019, 2020, and all these years around, transportation was actually pretty big, pretty massive, with the start of EV makers, EV battery manufacturing, and the rest. And energy had a bit, taken effect. Still very active, but less of the role that it had historically. At the beginning, was really only energy, climate tech, like 2 decades ago or whatever. And then in the last years, has been like a steady climb back of energy as a key topic that fits, really the narrative of energy, resilience, and security, and everything. And it's really been like a lot of comeback for energy, and we've seen instead, especially transportation, going back to a lot less activity, I'd say, because a lot of that has matured to market deployment. It's not because not value is being created, but it's really transitioning to adoption.
And I'm curious actually on your opinion of what's going to happen with this. Is this going to be a continued trend? Is there more breakthroughs to happen in transportation? I mean, it does still feel like we're a while away from as much adoption as we're.
This goes a bit in the opinion side, of course, but I'd say that to me it has crossed the mainstream adoption, and I think also the technology has mostly been there. Batteries have become really cheap, and we are not even seeing that, especially if we are in Europe and in the US, because what people don't realize is that the battery of the cars that you're buying today, it's like 4 or 5 years old technology and cost, because they are really slow, because it needs to be integrated with the vehicle development, from the design and everything, and then it needs to be purchased in advance and everything. So you're still paying the cost of what it was a battery maybe 3 years ago, and they've been dramatically decreasing in price. And in many countries, adoption is going past 50% even. So you can unlock new batteries, chemistry and things, and they will come hopefully. But it's what the market has been showing, at least in my view, is that you already have what you need for really adoption. It's a bit the US and Europe that are lagging behind, and not just places like China, but places like Vietnam or Thailand have higher EV adoption than mature markets. So it's not really about the tech. It's a bit of a mix of culture, adoption of like the old automakers and everything. But it's gonna come. In Europe, for instance, this year it's again growing like 40-50% the market. It's a bit cyclical, but I guess you don't really need something completely new to go forward. There are some other things that, like aviation, that still needs a lot of breakthroughs and everything, but on the car market, a lot has been built in my view.
Got it.
And coupled with the rest, now deep tech is making the highest share ever of climate tech, meaning that there's really a bit of a focus on these new sectors like fusion or deep geothermal or my AI for mining discovery and these kind of things. And there's a bit less on the more just marketplaces, for instance, for adoption or a bit the SaaS side. And when we see what sectors have grown the most and attracted the most funding, well, we see that there's things like advanced materials or steel or things like that. Were you asking something, Orla?
Well, I was just going to say, yeah, how we define deep tech actually. So it's a novel scientific or engineering discovery that's making its way into the market for the first time. So this is properly frontier, the most recently science fiction and becoming science facts breakthroughs in technology.
Yeah, and in here we can see something like electric mobilities. Yeah, it's an umbrella of everything like EV vehicle manufacturing, batteries, and everything is of course a lot of funding still, but it's been slowing down compared to a few years ago because it's mostly a bit mature, and then we see some segments that have been struggling like alternative protein or things like this. While we see a lot of energy and some other bits in climate risk and everything that are still showing some sign of strength in the market and growing in the sense of funding. So what's up? The more it's high up, the more it's growing, and the more it's to the right, the bigger it is the sector, because we are comparing very small and very big stuff here.
We've got a question just before we're going to dive into a few of the subsectors, but Shana asks, do you think the drop in climate tech VC is more a case of the sector maturing, or do you think it's a point of concern because we've kind of seen a sort of a flatlining of overall VC in recent years?
Yeah, I think it's a mix. Like so, in some sense. Climate tech adoption of the technologies has been going pretty fast. Of course, it could go faster, with a bit of technical, with a lot of policy support, whatever. But most of the technologies are really scaling fast globally. I mean, locally can be different. EVs, renewables, grid tech, and all of these things have been really scaling up. Batteries, massive growth. Then that doesn't always translate into good investment opportunities, especially VC. It's not the main way that a place like China has been scaling this, but it's the main way that Europe and US have been approaching this. And like taking the battery space, the market has of course been massively successful. Batteries are growing very fast in deployment, but has it been a winning bet in the US and Europe for VCs? Some bits, yes, but other not. So it's a matter of many things together. So we have to differentiate what is like a win in general for climate tech adoption and what is a big win for VC returns. And it's good if they align, because then they keep investing. But sometimes we have to realize that maybe one specific sector of climate tech might not be anymore a good one to invest as VC fundings. And maybe it's a good thing and you invest those money somewhere else, So we need to a bit realize that a lot of these things are past the VC market for a lot of things. And then there's still some bit where we really need VC.
And there's also some areas where VC is getting involved where traditionally they wouldn't have touched as well. Something like nuclear fusion would have been kind of national level research funding, and actually now it's becoming a kind of VC play, which is interesting. So it's kind of happened on both ends. It's moving.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, it's there were even some deep tech VCs telling me they wouldn't touch nuclear, and now we see not only climate or deep tech VCs, but even some generalists investing in fusion or fusion. So yeah, there's a lot of in where they think the market is going, or all these things. And then going to some of the topics that a bit more close to the maybe resilience and energy security side. There's grid technology has been attracting a lot of funding. There's been some cool down, but still, quite notable activity and way up if we look back to even just 2020. And we split this up in a lot of segments that you can explore in the platform and see all the startups, see the trends. But we see this in a very broad lens, from really the new suppliers that take a flexibility first approach to, adoption of distributed energy resources for businesses and consumers. So it can be batteries deployed in a house, it can be, adjusting all the upsetting and consuming and everything. Of course, batteries that are focused on grid balancing, grid balancing and energy trading, and then all the really grid tech like more on monitoring and management, but also the hardware for the expansion of the grid. These topics are attracting a lot of attention, and a lot of that is actually a bit more in Europe than in the US, where the grid in general is more advanced, smart meters are more advanced, there's a lot more interconnection and so on. And we have seen this market develop. There's a lot of different ways for startups to play and different strategies also for this year. And this, we have seen still a lot of space here, for investment and activity.
And is this the kind of thing that would prevent, those big blackouts in Spain and Portugal earlier this year? But also, even in the US, they have average of hours of blackouts each year. Is this the kind of technology?
Yeah. So the first thing is that it made so much headline that the blackout in Spain and Portugal, but if you compare Europe to the US, it's crazily more reliable, the grid in Europe, like a lot more reliable, like 10 times more. And this is due to a lot of things that the base, like in the most part, is because, how geographical it is, the extreme weather events and everything. So earlier in last year, there was Texas, 4 days without electricity. And people were just, if you had a own battery or an electric car, you could power your house. Otherwise, you were in the dark for a couple of days.
Yeah, it's not unusual for people to have a generator.
Yeah, it's very common in the US. In Europe, we are not really used to. What happened in Spain and Portugal is a bit tricky. And one of the key things is that, well, the grid is becoming in any way more complex, which is both, of course, it's complex, but it's also a good thing because you can unlock a lot of value. So you can have a lot of value in digital mode. It's really becoming something digital electricity, digital energy. So you have all the innovation of digital connected to physical stuff. But it also means that, there's some adjustment to be made. I think one of the key problems was that there were really few batteries deployed in Spain. So that means that batteries are one of the main stabilizing ways for when you transition to renewables and the rest. And well, I guess they will be deploying a lot in the next coming months and years. So that probably will help that a lot. And then were a lot of issue in the management of the grid, but it wasn't related to something specific, and it wasn't related to renewable energy failure of any plants or so on. Also, because if you think about it, well, solar panels or wind farms are distributed all across the country, so that simultaneous breakdown of all of these things is very uncommon. At one point in cases like Ukraine, who choose to build, different types of generation, is choosing to build wind and solar because it's harder to destroy, and it's harder, to stop because it's really spread out. So once you can balance this out and play around with batteries and everything, it's a lot more resilience. But there will be a bit of hiccups in getting there, of course.
Cool. So we track, I think, over 600 different startups that are operating in all of these different niches that relate to grid technology.
Yeah, in the screenshot you cannot see them all, but it's like around 20 categories. So if you are really deep into this stuff, you can see pretty granularly. And then on the nuclear, it was just a bit mind blowing to see how much money were going there. That there was a bit of a peak in 2021 just because Commonwealth Fusion in the US raised like a huge, like almost 2 billion, but for the rest it's like the last 2 years, so really strong activity, and this year like really strong, especially in fission but also in fusion. And when we look at this geographically, actually the US is really deploying a lot of money here, like we were discussing before. And just a bit of a comment, we were biased that it Europe has really the need for this and other, sides of for energy independence. And it's a bit crazy to see the US investing, 6-7 times more on this.
It's not just like such an acute need in Europe, but also it's been an area of real strength, and is still home to a large proportion of the nuclear startups, and yet it's the kind of US ones that are getting the backing from their domestic VCs. And
if we look at number of companies, Europe is definitely ahead. And then there are a few, with a few, even 100 millions of funding. But we don't see like, the 1-2 billion just invested like this in nuclear fusion or fission. So, well, maybe a champion will still come out of Europe, but with all the strengths, of the research, of the talent and the companies, well, it could have been a different balance, which talks a bit about other things like the depth of capital market and the rest.
Yeah, and there is still some, work going on the public side as well in terms of nuclear research, which is funded in Europe. But again,
that's a lot. That's been like really the training ground for a lot of these people to then go and try commercially. But I think reasonably no one expect like that to become the real first generation, and they expect a bit more the private market to get there first.
And nuclear fusion, is it still 10 years away? They say it's been, 10 years away for 50 years.
Some companies have committed in some kind of agreements to like end of this decade. So I guess we will see in a few years. It will be like more demonstration, like maybe kind of producing a bit of energy that can go in the grid. It's not gonna power like a city or something at first, but even just being able to generate positive energy and not negative, like using more energy to power it up, it's already like a big step. Then getting to a bit of a commercial size is the other big one. So yeah, I guess in end of the decade we will know a bit more.
Wow, well, that would be amazing. I'll see.
And of course, in Biro you can explore this if you're into these sectors across the different technologies, the different role of companies both in fusion and fission, so the SAT technology, material, and so on that they use. And just a final comment, because we get asked about this a lot. So there's of course a lot of AI deployment, data center coming up, and there's all sorts of projection on how big this can become for demand. Some projections say it can become like 5% of the total electricity demand in Europe, and a lot higher in the US, like 12%, which is still, it's not inevitable. That there's a lot that can be done on the efficiency side, like in one decade ago, like from 2010 to 2020, the consumption of data center barely increased. Well, the workload increased like a lot, like 17 times. And that was a lot about energy efficiency. The last few years, energy efficiency hasn't been able to move fast enough as the workload. So we are seeing more, energy demand and emission associated. But still, we need to put that a bit into context. At least in most prediction, you never know how things really go. But in most scenarios, data center is less than, for instance, what we see here as called strangely space cooling, which is like air conditioning, for instance, and the electrification of transport vehicles and industry and so on. That will drive probably more demand increase than data centers realistically, unless we really go crazy in deploying this data center like out of the world scale. But in most of the cases, it might be like 10% of the growth in the rest of this decade.
Okay, so the fear of AI exploding our energy usage is potentially a little overblown if we can kind of get on top of efficiency at the same time.
But this is global. While when you look at local, it can be strongly different. Like places like Ireland that were really big on data center are already like hitting their limits. They cannot really build reasonably anything else, and the last few data centers haven't been approved. And the US is also getting a bit tricky. There's a lot of push from tech companies and the governments, and still there's acceptance. But what's happening is that while in the last 2 decades most of the demand growth in energy was coming from emerging markets, well, China first of all, of course, but India and the rest of emerging economies, and Europe and the US pretty much had no demand growth in energy. Now that's changing and it's growing back again, and we are not used to that anymore. As deployment of energy, as everything. And so, for instance, in the US, electricity prices are really spiking up. And so even if it's like 10% more, that 10%, which can also be locally a lot more, can really drive prices and get like a energy power squeeze. So then can have a really strong effect. There's some people are even theorizing that if this is really goes out of balance, the higher prices can be like a stop to the rest of the economy, basically, because then if you need to manufacture, if you need to do anything else, then these prices become unattainable for you, and the rest is lost, but the AI grows fast. So it's a bit of a tricky issue when you deploy them to a country or to a region. So globally, it's not going to be like all the demand growth, but locally can be really a big problem, especially in deploying this generation fast enough and everything.
Although if we crack nuclear fusion, then we'll have energy abundance by the end of the decade, you said. So
no, by the end of the decade we will have maybe some demonstration, and no idea when and if it becomes something. Then it all becomes so. If it's possible, then we talk about cost, I guess. I honestly have no idea, and I think no one has real idea what the cost might be. I guess if it's really truly unlocked at one point in the future, it will be very, very low. But in the meantime, it can be pretty expensive. So I guess it's for the next 1-2 decades, we have to figure it out more on the deploying renewable really faster. And then maybe we hope we have this.
All right, some wind farms for Ireland instead then to power the data centers.
Yeah.
I'm not sure solar works so well there.
Yeah, and then we will go to the platform. So, if you have questions on how to do things, just drop them in the chat so we can adapt, to what you want to see. But I will switching, to the live platform to see how one can explore trends, how can one see specific stuff inside really the platform.
Yeah, we're going to show you exactly where all this data comes from Dealroom itself. We'll share these slides after as well, but if you do have any questions about the data shared so far, or about the platform and the tags and the taxonomy and all of that stuff, then let us know.
Yeah, so going to the platform, one place that we often start, discovering trends is this sector page, where we basically, aggregate, hundreds and thousands of segments. And for instance, you can search for climate tech and you get, some sectors, and they're a bit ranked in the terms of aggregating different parameters of VC funding, new startups, the number of rounds, the growth, evaluation, and everything. And then you see, well, nuclear, it's above the ranks, but there's also things like carbon utilization, advanced materials, and energy storage that have been market where we have seen, a lot of recent activity or, growth. You can play around with this, sort and everything. And when you click on one of these, you're also, sorry, I need to share. And when you click on one of these, then you get taken out to an overview page where we aggregate all kind of info about the sectors. So you can see, the funding, the company growth. You can it suggests startups at different stages, from very little stage to scale ups, where you can explore these companies. You can explore also what kind of research we have around these things, rounds, news around these companies. So what's happening with the recently new round, but also just news about new partnership or deployment. And of course, then you can zoom down on some of these companies and then see the specific information. So that's one. Not familiar with them specifically, but it seems they just raised a pretty sizable seed round for nuclear fusion in the US. It seems a bit more towards application even around mobile and everything. And you can see it's part of our landscape on small high temperature gas cooled in this case. So you can see all this info about this company, what the founder is, what kind of growth the company has had, and everything around that. And of course, you can see, what kind of, you can filter for anything and see these trends and explore, exactly the transaction, what these companies are, and everything around these sectors.
Yeah, so you can make your own version of the deck as well with the different subsectors you're interested in.
Yeah.
If you also have any feedback for us about any of the taxonomy mapping, or then do let us know. We're always adding to it as new niches emerge. And also, if you find a company profile that you would like more information about, there's a button on every company profile that says request enhancement, and then we'll kind of do that for you. We'll enhance all the info straight away. So you won't be missing any data for long. I've just put the link into the comments for any of the premium users that are on the call. And also, if you're not a premium user yet, then we also offer currently slots if you want to have a call about climate tech and about your needs. Then we've got on the last slide that we're going to go to in a sec, there'll be a link for you to sign up for. And yeah, happy to have that.
Yeah, and of course you can search for single companies or even just type what you want. If I'm interested in grid, I will write it and maybe I get suggested, okay, this is our mapping globally. And then you can see all the companies. In this case, it's a lot, so probably you're not interested in all of it. And you can zoom into a single one of these, see the companies, see the trends, the transaction and everything, and then create your strategy, do a bit of market research, and then discover the single companies.
We've got a question about the taxonomy, actually, Lorenzo, which is, do you have some tags that are part of multiple sectors, for example, deep tech, climate tech? Can you speak about the taxonomy with respect to these crossover areas?
Yeah, so I can use this company. This is a pretty strange one because they do I think if I remember well, they use photonics, and so you conduct tech to on net electricity network lines to allow more electricity to pass on the same line. So you don't need to rebuild the grid, but you can maybe make them pass 40%, 50% more electricity there by cooling and other stuff. So in this case, we classify them as energy, of course, and around the energy providers and everything, but also as semiconductor. They are deep tech hardware, they have really new technology, physical and everything. And then they are both part of grid technology, but they're also photonics tech. So these things overlap and intersect between them. So it's really thought a bit for discovery and a bit also to explore trends. So we want to apply to the right set of company, not to everything that could be tangentially interesting, but we want companies to be multiples of them because you might want to explore the same companies in different ways, basically. So there are overlaps, and the structure is a bit seen when one goes into this stuff. So there are, we typically allow only 2 industries, often only 1, but then tags, there's a lot of them, and there are all the different ways that something is relevant and what something can be explored.
All the tags can also be used as exclusion filters as well. So if you want to look at deep tech that's not climate tech, you can do that.
Yeah,
or if you want to look at things that are both deep tech and climate tech, you can, and so on. So yeah,
and
there's maximum 2 industries, and then beyond that, anything that's relevant to that company will also be tagged with.
And of course, then, you know, if you're really early stage, you can also go in people discovery and look, I don't know, for startups that were founded like this year in energy or whatever, and then you discover, you know, these people or where they studied or something, even stealth startup and everything, and then you decide, okay, this is what I want to focus on. You can explore a bit, you know, geographies where they studied, where they worked, if they were serial founders or things like this. And then, you know, also discover the startup very early to engage. So it depends, you know, a bit what's your focus, what's your use case. You can do very different things. Yeah.
Well, one question is, do we have a focus on H2, on hydrogen? So yes, the answer is.
Yeah, we do have, so like maybe less from you. So we typically, you know, have a few tags around that, you know, whether it's production, whether it's green hydrogen, or, you know, the other shades of hydrogen, whether it's, you know, around the more transportation side of things. And we also have a few, you know, mappings and curated research around that. So there can be like, if I type hydrogen, we have like a few maps around that, even some very niche about like natural hydrogen or things like that. So there's, you know, maybe the electrolysis, electrolyzer side of the different technology. There's, you know, a bit of the transport, storage, application, vehicles, and also some very niche one like, you know, natural hydrogen market maps and things like this. Typically, you know, you can just type what you want in the query bar and you will get suggested. So, you know, we have hydrogen, and then you can filter this out if I want hydrogen more on the energy side or the transportation side, or I want also poly-electrolyzer, and then you go more granular because, of course, there's a lot in hydrogen. We also have specific things like, I remember this one is sustainable aviation. So in their profile, I would say, you know, that this is e-fuel, so, you know, synthetic fuels that often made from hydrogen as one of the precursors. And then I can discover, you know, on the profile, I also see that they are part of this mapping on sustainable aviation. So maybe if I have a thesis or I want to research that market, I can also go around there. Or I can just, you know, okay, then I know that this tag exists, or I'm interested into this, I just click and then I discover, you know, that sector, and I just go like this.
Nice. Yeah, we had one more question, which was if a startup isn't on Dealroom, can they request to be included? And yes, they can. They can add themselves, they can make their own profile, or if there's a profile already, they can claim it and update all their information. We also then do a review of that stuff to make sure that it's aligning with the taxonomy and all of that. But yes, we love to crowdsource data as well. Nice. Well, unless there are any other questions, which I don't see at the moment, maybe we can wrap up there. But thank you all very much for joining. As I mentioned, we are offering you an opportunity to book a slot to have a chat with us about your needs, about your climate and resilience needs. We'll share the slides with you all after as well. And thanks very much for joining, and we'll be back soon. We're going to be doing the next couple of these. We're going to do one on defense, and we're also going to do one on spin outs. So look out for those. You can sign up from our social channel, our newsletter, and we'll be letting you know soon. Thanks very much.